I found out my house had been paid off, every last penny, by a man I hadn't spoken to in 31 years. My late brother's attorney called me on a Tuesday morning, and I remember standing in my kitchen in my bathrobe, holding a mug of coffee that went cold while he explained it. A bequest, he called it. My brother Franklin had left me his entire estate, the house I was standing in, the one I'd been paying a mortgage on for 22 years, was now fully mine, along with a life insurance policy that had been quietly accumulating since 1987. The total, after taxes and legal fees, came to just over $1.4 million. I sat down on the kitchen floor, not in a chair, on the floor because my knees just went. Franklin and I hadn't spoken since our mother's funeral. That was 2001. There had been a disagreement, the kind that starts small and then calcifies into something permanent. I won't say who was right because honestly, after all this time, I'm not even sure I remember. What I know is that we were both too stubborn and then too ashamed to undo it. And then one morning he was gone and there was no more time to fix it. He had no children, no wife. He left everything to me, his little sister, with a note the attorney read aloud that simply said, "Take care of yourself, Claudette. You never did that enough." I'm 64 years old. I spent the last 9 of those years married to a man named, well, I'll just call him my husband because that's what he was to me, even when he stopped acting like it. His name was Stuart. And while I was sitting on that kitchen floor crying over a brother I'd wasted 31 years being stubborn with, my husband was at his gym. At least, that's what I thought. I want you to understand who I was before that Tuesday morning, because it matters. I had been a dental office manager for 26 years. I was organized. I was good at reading people. I could spot a billing error from 3 pages away, and I knew the moment a patient walked in whether they were going to be difficult. People used to say I was sharp. My co-workers, my friends from church, my daughters, Mom's sharp, my older daughter always said like it was a warning. And yet, Stuart had been lying to me for, I would find out later, almost 4 years. 4 years, right under my sharp nose. He was 58. We'd met at a neighborhood association meeting of all places, which sounds terribly unglamorous, but that's the truth. He was recently divorced, owned a small HVAC company that did well, and he had this way of listening to you that made you feel like the only person in the room. I was 55 and recently retired, and lonely in that particular way that women my age get lonely, not desperate, just quietly aware that the rooms are very empty. We dated for 2 years and then we married, and I will tell you honestly that the first 3 years were genuinely good. Not perfect, but good. Then they weren't. He started working later, coming home with that particular kind of tired that isn't really tired, it's somewhere else. He stopped asking about my day. He forgot our anniversary 1 year and then the next, and when I brought it up, he made me feel like I was being unreasonable for noticing. Small things, the kind of small things that when you're 62 and you've worked hard and you want to believe you made the right decision, you learn not to look at too closely. I had about $83,000 in savings, my own account, my own money. I'd always kept it separate because I'd raised 2 daughters mostly alone after my first marriage ended, and I never forgot what it felt like to have nothing. My financial advisor, a quiet woman named Ms. Okoro, had helped me grow it over the years. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. Stuart knew about it, not the exact amount, but he knew it existed. I did not, on that Tuesday morning, tell him about Franklin's money. I don't know why exactly. I'd like to say it was wisdom, some deep intuition that something was wrong. But honestly, in that first hour, I think I just needed it to be mine for a little while before it became ours. I told myself I'd tell him at dinner. I never did, because that afternoon I drove to the gym to surprise him with lunch. A simple thing. I picked up sandwiches from that deli he liked on Peachtree, the one with the good turkey club. I parked and walked in through the main entrance, and the young man at the front desk smiled at me and said, He just went out to the parking lot maybe 5 minutes ago." I thanked him and walked back out. Stuart was sitting in his truck. The engine was off. He was on the phone and he was laughing the way he used to laugh with me, relaxed, almost boyish, like he didn't have a care in the world. I stopped on the sidewalk. He couldn't see me from where he was parked. I don't know what made me stand there instead of walking over. Maybe it was the sound of that laugh, the particular quality of it, the intimacy. I heard him say, "Not much longer, I promise. Once the sale goes through, we'll be able to move properly. She won't fight it. She doesn't have the resources to." The sandwiches were in a paper bag in my hand. I remember the bag was starting to sweat from the warmth. He was talking about me. I knew it the way you know things in your body before your brain agrees to accept them. My feet were completely still on that sidewalk. A woman walked past me with a stroller and smiled, and I smiled back, and the whole time I was doing that, the whole time I was performing normalcy for a stranger, some part of me was very quietly dying. I drove home. I ate my half of the turkey club alone at the kitchen table. When Stuart came home that evening, I had dinner ready and I listened to him talk about a new commercial contract, and I said all the right things, and when he went to bed, I sat in the dark living room and I thought, she doesn't have the resources. He thought he knew what resources I had. He was wrong. The first thing I did was call my daughter, my younger one. Her name is not in any list I'm allowed to use, so I'll simply say she is 38, she is a paralegal, and she has her father's gift for stubbornness, and my gift for keeping her mouth shut when it counts. I drove to her apartment the next morning and told her everything, the phone call, the money, Franklin, all of it. She listened without interrupting, which is rare for her, and when I finished she looked at me for a long moment and said, "Mama, don't put a single dollar of Uncle Franklin's money anywhere he can see it." I nodded. That was already the plan. We went that morning to a credit union across town, not the one Stuart and I used jointly, not anywhere near our neighborhood. I opened a new individual account under my name only. The attorney for Franklin's estate transferred the funds there directly. My daughter was the only other person who knew it existed. I made her promise not to tell her sister yet, not until I understood more clearly what I was dealing with. The next few weeks I became a different kind of careful. I kept my routines identical. I cooked the same meals. I watched the same programs. I went to church on Sunday and smiled in all the right photographs. But I started paying attention in a way I hadn't let myself before, really paying attention, without the comfortable blur of wanting things to be fine. I found the second cell phone on a Thursday evening in March. It was in the inner pocket of his suit jacket, the grey one he wore for client meetings. I'd taken it to drop off at the dry cleaners, and I was checking the pockets out of habit, the way you do after 20-something years of finding forgotten receipts and parking stubs. It was a prepaid phone, one of those ones you buy at Walgreens. There were messages on it that I will not describe in detail because some things, once you've seen them, you spend years trying to unsee. Her name, the woman's name, was Renee. She was 44. I found this out later. She worked in the leasing office of a building where Stuart had an HVAC contract. I don't hate her, actually. Not anymore. At the time I did, the way you hate anyone who has something you thought was yours. But Stuart was the one who made promises to me. He was the one who said in sickness and in health while his daughters stood there watching. I put the phone back exactly the way I'd found it. I dropped a suit at the cleaners. I drove home and made a pot of coffee and sat very still for a very long time. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, Ms. Okoro. I told her I needed to understand something. If a couple divorces in Georgia after one spouse receives an inheritance, is that inheritance considered marital property? She said it was a question for a family law attorney, not a financial advisor, but in general, especially if the inheritance was kept separate and never commingled with marital assets, The answer was often no. It remained separate property. She gave me the name of an attorney she trusted. I wrote it down and said I was asking for a friend. I was not asking for a friend. The attorney's name was Miss Yeboah. She was 60 herself, I think, grey locks and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she had one of those voices that makes you feel like the situation is not hopeless, even when it is. I told her everything. The phone call I'd overheard, the prepaid phone, the comment about resources. She listened with the same focused quiet my daughter had, and when I finished, she said, "Tell me about his business." I told her what I knew. The HVAC company had been doing well, or so he'd told me. He'd mentioned twice in the past year that he was thinking about selling it. I hadn't asked too many questions because he handled his business, and I'd respected that boundary. Mistake number 1, or maybe mistake number 400. I'd stopped counting. Ms. Yeboah said if he's planning to sell the company before filing for divorce, it's possible he's trying to time the sale to either reduce what appears in the marital estate or to move money somewhere harder to find. What does he tell you the company is worth? He'd mentioned a number once, around 400,000. She wrote something down. We should request a formal business valuation, and I'd like you to document everything you can remember about his finances during the marriage. Any accounts you know of, any major purchases, anything that felt off. I went home and I started writing. I am a woman who kept files. I'd managed a dental practice for 26 years. I knew how to document things. I had records of joint accounts going back 8 years. I had records of the 2 large cash withdrawals Stuart had made the previous fall that he'd explained as business expenses. I had a rough memory of a conversation where he'd mentioned a storage unit he was renting, something about equipment. Why would an HVAC owner with a company warehouse need a separate personal storage unit? I had not asked at the time. I asked now, silently, in the margins of my notes. The following Sunday, while Stuart was at a so-called client lunch, I drove to the storage facility address I found on an old email he'd left open on the shared laptop. I didn't go inside. I just drove past slowly. His truck was not there, but a silver SUV was, and a woman got out and unlocked the unit. I couldn't see her face clearly from the road, but I didn't need to. I took note of the unit number and I drove home. I called Miss Yeboah on Monday morning. She filed a motion for temporary financial disclosures as part of the divorce preparation. I hadn't filed yet. I wasn't ready. But she explained we could move quickly once I decided. In the meantime, she suggested I hire someone to do a preliminary asset search. She gave me the name of a firm. I paid their retainer with my own savings account. The old one, the one Stuart knew about, so there was nothing to hide about the expenditure if he checked. The picture that came back was not a surprise by that point, but it was worse in specifics than I'd imagined in general. Stuart had a second business account in the name of his company's parent LLC that I had never been made aware of. He had been pulling money from the HVAC company into that LLC for approximately 2 years. The storage unit was under that LLC's name. And the sale he'd referenced on the phone call. He'd already found a buyer. He was 3 weeks from closing. I thought about what he'd said. She won't fight it. She doesn't have the resources. I thought about Franklin, who spent 31 years being too stubborn to pick up the phone, and left me everything he had in an apology I'd never get to hear in his actual voice. I thought about my $83,000 that had grown quietly over the years, while I'd clipped coupons and worked through lunch, because I knew, I had always known, that a woman needs something that belongs only to her. I thought about $1.4 million sitting in a credit union account on the other side of town, untouched, undetected, and very patient. And I thought, all right, Stuart, let's find out what resources look like. I filed for divorce on a Wednesday morning. Ms. Yeboah filed simultaneously for an emergency injunction to freeze the sale of the business, pending full financial disclosure. Stuart was served at his office. He called me 6 times in the span of an hour. I watched the phone ring and I let it go to voicemail all 6 times. He came home that evening looking like a man who'd had a very bad day. I was in the kitchen. I had made dinner because it felt important to be doing something ordinary with my hands. "Claudette," he said, "just my name. The way you say someone's name when you've run out of other words." I set the serving spoon down and looked at him, and I said, "Were you ever going to tell me about Renee, or were you planning to simply make sure I had nothing left by the time I found out?" The colour left his face. He sat down at the kitchen table like his legs had given out. He started to say something about mistakes, about being confused, about how things had gotten complicated. I let him talk. I had learned to let people talk because they always tell you more than they mean to. When he finally finished, I said quietly, "You told someone on the phone that I don't have the resources to fight you. I need you to understand something. You made a very significant error in your calculations." He looked at me. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer that question. I picked up my serving spoon and finished dishing out dinner, and then I went to the guest room and locked the door. The court proceedings took 8 months. 8 months of financial disclosures and depositions, and a forensic accountant, Ms. Yaboa, brought in, who took apart Stewart's LLC like she was unfolding a paper crane, slowly, carefully, revealing every crease, the hidden account. The 2 years of systematic transfers, the sale that had been frozen just in time, at 11 days before closing, the storage unit which turned out to contain not HVAC equipment, but documented records of transactions he had clearly intended to keep separate from anything a divorce court might see. Georgia is an equitable distribution state. That doesn't mean equal. It means the court looks at the full picture of the marriage and divides accordingly. The full picture of this marriage was not flattering to Stewart. His attorney argued that I had also concealed assets, specifically Franklin's inheritance. Miss Yaboa was ready for that. She presented documentation that the inheritance had been received, kept in a completely separate account, never deposited into any joint account, never used for any marital expense. Under Georgia law, an inheritance kept separate from marital funds is generally the separate property of the spouse who received it. His argument didn't hold. What held was the forensic accountant's report. What held was 2 years of transfers into an LLC he'd never disclosed. What held was the timeline, the deliberate attempt to close a business sale before divorce proceedings could freeze it. The judge was a woman about my age. With reading glasses she took off and put on throughout the hearing like punctuation. When she announced the division of assets, Stewart's attorney asked for a recess. Stewart's attorney asked for a recess. Stewart sat very still in his chair. I sat very still in mine. The final settlement divided the marital assets, including the HVAC company at its court-assessed value, which was considerably higher than the $400,000 Stewart had casually mentioned, equitably, with the weight of the adjustment in my favour given the documented financial misconduct. His hidden accounts were factored in. The sale he'd been trying to rush through was completed after the divorce, and a significant portion of those proceeds came to me as part of the settlement. Franklin's money stayed mine, untouched, every dollar of it. I moved out of that house the following spring, not because I had to. My attorney made sure I had every right to it, but because I didn't want it. Too many rooms I'd walked through pretending everything was fine. I found a place about 40 minutes north of Atlanta, smaller, which I didn't mind, with a covered porch that looks out over a stand of old pine trees and gets the morning light just right. I paid for it in cash. My daughter, the paralegal, helped me move. My older daughter came too once everything came out. She cried and apologized for not seeing it sooner, and I told her the truth that I hadn't let myself see it either, for a long time, because seeing it meant having to do something about it. And doing something about it is frightening when you're 63 years old and you've worked so hard to build a life that you can't quite stand the thought of watching it fall apart. I understood, I told her. I understood completely. I sit on that porch most mornings now with my coffee. The trees don't care whether I'm sharp or oblivious or anything in between. The light comes up the same way regardless. I put a portion of Franklin's money into a trust for my grandchildren's education. I kept the rest invested because Mizukoro and I had a long conversation about making it last and making it grow, and I intend to do both. I made a donation to a legal aid organization that helps women navigate divorce proceedings who can't afford an attorney like Ms. Uboa. That felt necessary. I thought about writing Franklin a letter and then remembered I couldn't send it anywhere. So instead, I sat on the porch one evening when the light was very particular and gold, and I said out loud to nobody, "Thank you, I'm taking care of myself. You were right that I didn't do that enough." The pine trees didn't answer, but the evening was very quiet and very still, and I'm going to count that. If you'd told me at 55, when I was standing in that neighborhood association meeting, watching a man listen to me like I was the only person in the room, that a decade later I would be sitting alone on a porch in the North Georgia hills with more security than I'd had at any point in my adult life, I don't know if I would have believed you, not because I doubted myself exactly, but because we are taught, women of my generation especially, that certain things only happen to younger women, smarter women, luckier women, that after a certain point the story is mostly written. The story is not mostly written. That is the thing I want you to take from this. I am 64 years old. I am the sharpest I have ever been. And I say that without vanity. I say it because I earned it the hard way through 31 years of stubbornness, with a brother I should have called, and 9 years of willful blindness, with a man I should have looked at more clearly, and 2 years of writing down everything I knew in a notebook at my kitchen table after the house went quiet. The morning light comes through those pine trees every single day, and every single day I drink my coffee and I think, there is so much still ahead of me. And I believe it now in a way I couldn't have before. Which city are you listening from? I'd genuinely love to know. And if this story reached you, if any part of it felt familiar, I hope you'll tell me in the comments. I read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this, and I'll see you in the next one. I think about that parking lot a lot. The way I stood on the sidewalk holding a paper bag of sandwiches, listening to my husband laugh on the phone about what I wouldn't be able to do, what I didn't have, what I couldn't fight. And the thing is, he wasn't entirely wrong about who I had been. For years, I had made myself smaller than I was. I had not asked enough questions. I had respected boundaries that turned out to be walls built to keep me from seeing what was really happening on the other side of them. That's the part that stays with me, not the betrayal itself, but my own willingness to not look. What I've come to understand, sitting on his porch with enough time and enough quiet to be honest with myself, is that the money was never the real weapon. It gave me options, yes. It gave me the ability to hire Ms. Yevo, to commission a forensic accountant, to move without panic. But the actual turning point was a decision I made in the car on the way home from that parking lot, a decision to stop pretending, to stop accepting the comfortable version of things, and to start paying attention with both eyes open. That decision cost nothing. It required only the willingness to face what I already, on some level, knew. There is a version of this story where I walk up to that truck and knock on the window and the whole thing explodes right there in a gym parking lot, and I lose my composure and my leverage, and probably half of what I was entitled to. I am grateful I did not do that. Not because restraint is a virtue I was born with. I was not, but because in that moment something in me understood that reacting from pain would only serve him. He was counting on the version of me that would fall apart, the version he'd apparently been studying for years while planning his exit. What he had not accounted for was that I had been studying too. 30 years of running an office, of watching people underestimate the woman managing the schedule and the files, of knowing exactly which details matter and which ones are noise. Franklin used to say I was the sharp one. He meant it as a compliment, though we were too stubborn to be kind to each other often enough. What I've learned is that being sharp means nothing if you don't use it in your own defense. Intelligence, without the courage to act on what you know, is just a very sophisticated way of lying to yourself. I knew things were wrong. I chose comfort over clarity for years, and I let that choice shrink me. What Stuart could not take from me, what no person in a situation like mine can have taken from them if they refuse to give it up, is the willingness to stand back up and think clearly. That is not a matter of money or age or luck. It is a matter of deciding, in a parking lot or a kitchen or a courthouse hallway, that you are not finished and you are not defeated and you are going to do the next right thing with whatever you actually have. I had my mind. I had my years. I had a brother who loved me in the only language he had left, which was a document with my name on it. And I had, finally, the willingness to stop being careful with the wrong things and start being careful with the right ones. That willingness, that refusal to fold, is something no settlement can grant you and no betrayal can fully take away, as long as you choose to keep it.